The first wolf came to her door on the coldest night of the year, and by the time I noticed, 39 more had followed him. I am Corwin, king of Ravensworth, and I did not notice for far too long, because I had trained myself not to look at the kennel-keeper at all. It began, as these things do, with something so small I nearly stepped over it in the dark. I was crossing the lower courtyard past midnight, checking the watch fires, when I saw a shape curled against the old stone door at the end of the kennel row, the door that belonged to Fenna, the woman who fed and tended my hounds and my wolves alike, who had held that post for 3 winters without a single soul in my hall remembering to ask her name at the spring feast. The shape was Bram, my grandsire's own gray wolf, a creature so proud he had bitten 2 stable hands and refused every hand that was not mine since the old king died. Bram, asleep at a servant's threshold, nose tucked beneath his own tail as if he had chosen the softest bed in the castle. I told myself it was the cold. Wolves seek warmth where warmth is offered, and Fenna's door faced away from the wind. I did not sleep that night, though I told myself the wakefulness was owed to the cold snap and nothing more. I lay in my own broad bed beneath my own banners and found myself listening, absurdly, for some sound that might carry up from the kennel row. Those stone walls 3 courtyards thick have never in the history of Ravensworth carried a wolf's breathing to a king's chamber. In the morning I asked my steward, as though the question were idle, whether the kennel-keeper had slept well. He looked at me with the polite confusion of a man who has never once been asked such a thing of a servant, and said he supposed so. My king, why would he not suppose so? I did not ask again. By the 2nd week of the frost, there were 11. I stood in the archway above the kennel yard one evening and counted them myself, because the steward had come to me looking troubled, saying the animals would not settle in their own runs any more, that they scratched at the gate the moment Fenna crossed the yard toward her quarters, that Bram in particular had taken to walking at her heel like a shadow given breath. I watched her cross that yard with a bucket of scraps balanced on her hip, her plain wool cloak drawn tight, her dark hair escaping its braid in the wind, and I watched 11 wolves rise from where they lay and follow her the way water follows a slope downhill, not summoned, not commanded, simply drawn. She did not seem to notice it as anything strange. She spoke to them the way she might speak to children who were underfoot, scolding gently, stepping around an old scarred hunter named Ash who had once torn a rope from a huntsman's hand rather than be leashed. Ash lay down across her doorway that night as if he were made of stone. I asked my huntmaster, a grizzled man named Petrus who had buried 2 of my father's finest trackers and outlived every rumor of his own retirement, whether he had ever seen wolves gather so before. He rubbed his jaw and considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Once, my king, when I was a boy, my own grandmother kept bees that would not swarm for any hand but hers, and the old folks said it was because she had never once lied to them, not even a kindness dressed as truth. Bees know, wolves know better. He said nothing further, but the way he looked at me afterward, sidelong and thoughtful, told me he had already drawn the conclusion I was not yet prepared to draw myself. I told the steward it was nothing. I told myself the same. I had wolves enough in my keeping who trusted no man but me. That was the shape of the world I had built, the discipline of Ravensworth, animals who obeyed one voice and answered to one hand. It unsettled me more than I let show, that they had found another hand to answer to, and unsettled me further still that I had not chosen to look closely at whose hand it was until the pack made me. There was a girl in the kitchens, Yona, who had served me wine at table since I was a boy grown to a man, and it was she who first said Fenna's name to me directly, without my having asked. "She's kind to the ones no one else will touch," Yona said, setting down a jug with more force than the task required, the way servants speak when they mean to be heard beyond what they say aloud. "There's a hound in the lower run, blind in one eye, snaps at every hand but hers. She sits with him an hour before she'll eat her own supper." I nodded and said nothing, and told myself the information was of no particular use to a king, though I found myself thinking of the blind hound for the rest of that evening, and of the woman who gave him an hour she might have spent resting her own tired feet. I went to see the hound myself 2 days later, telling my captain it was a matter of the kennel's good order. The hound snapped at me exactly as promised. Fenna, crouched nearby mending a torn harness strap, did not look up from her work. He does that to everyone at first, my king, even me when I came. You have to let him decide you're staying before he'll decide you're safe. She said it plainly, without any weight beneath it, and yet I carried the words with me long after, turning them over as though they had been meant for more than the hound. It was not a week later that I saw the whole measure of her, in a way no report from a steward could have given me. A wagon of traders had come up from the southern road with a wolf caged among their goods, a great black male half-starved and half-mad with fear, meaning to sell him as a curiosity to some lord who fancied wild things behind bars. The creature had gone berserk in the lower yard, splintering the cage rails, and every man present had drawn back with pikes raised, myself included, for a wolf in that state kills without meaning to and dies for it after. Fenna came running from the kennel row with nothing in her hands at all, no rope, no goad, and walked straight into the space every soldier had cleared. "Put the pikes down," she said, not raising her voice, though there was iron enough beneath the words that even my captain obeyed her before he thought to look to me for leave. She knelt in the churned snow at a careful distance from the wolf, and simply waited, speaking low words I could not hear, until the creature's ragged breathing slowed and his hackles settled, and he crept toward her on his belly like something remembering, at long last, what a gentle hand felt like. She did not touch him for the better part of an hour. When she finally did, laying her palm flat against his matted neck, the whole yard let out a breath it had been holding. "You might have been killed," I said afterward, my voice rougher than I intended, the fear I had swallowed during that long hour finally finding its way out as something close to anger. She looked at me, unoffended, entirely steady. "I might have, so might any of your pikemen if they'd gone at him with iron. Fear answers fear, my king. It rarely answers anything else." She turned back to the black wolf, who I later learned she named Cole, and did not seem to notice that I stood rooted to that spot a good while longer than dignity required, shaken by something that had nothing to do with the danger she'd walked into, and everything to do with how little she seemed to value her own safety weighed against a frightened creature's need. By midwinter, there were 23. Ravensworth's midwinter feast fell that same week, the one occasion each year when every soul in the castle, from the highest lord to the lowest scullery hand, sat within the same hall to mark the turning of the dark toward light. It had always been my father's custom, and mine after him, to have the whole household seated, servants along the lower tables, and I confess I had never once in 3 years let my eye linger long enough on those lower benches to notice whether the kennel-keeper attended at all. That year I looked. She sat at the very end, near the door, dressed in the same plain wool she wore to muck the runs, her hands scrubbed raw and pink from the cold, laughing quietly at something the stable master's daughter had said to her. She looked, in that unguarded moment, entirely at ease in a way I rarely saw in my own hall among my own lords, and I found myself watching her instead of the singers my steward had hired at considerable expense, until Wexley leaned close and asked, dryly, whether the entertainment displeased me. "The entertainment is fine," I said. "Then it is something at the far end of the hall that holds your eye so thoroughly," he said, and did not wait for my answer before turning back to his own plate, though the corner of his mouth had curved in a way that told me he already knew precisely what, or who, had claimed my attention. I did not go to her that night, feast or no feast, custom holding me to my own high table longer than I wished to be held. But I watched her rise near the evening's end and slip out quietly before the last toasts, unnoticed by anyone but me, and I thought of her walking back alone through the cold to a door where, I would learn within days, A dozen wolves already waited faithfully for her return, warmer welcome than any feast had given her inside those walls. I began to find reasons to walk the kennel row myself, though I told my captain it was for the health of the hounds, though I told my own reflection it was for the good order of the yard. What I found instead was Fenna kneeling in the frozen straw beside a wolf pup too weak to nurse, breathing warmth into her cupped hands and pressing them to its belly, murmuring to it in a low, unhurried voice, as though the two of them had all the time in the world and none of the cold mattered. She did not startle when I entered. She never startled at much. I had noticed that about her before I let myself admit I had noticed anything. She simply glanced up, said, "My king, mind the gate, it swings," and went back to the pup. I minded the gate. I stood a long while after, watching her work, and something happened in me that I had no name for and still barely do, not a surge, not a howl, nothing so loud as those words suggest. It was more like a low bell struck once far off, the sound arriving after the strike itself, so that I felt the echo before I understood there had been a blow at all. I put a hand flat against the stone wall to steady myself and told no one. That was the night I learned her name was not simply the kennel girl to anyone but me. Everyone else already knew it. My own huntmaster called her Fenna easily, warmly, the way one speaks of a person long trusted. I was the only man in Ravensworth who had contrived, through some cowardice I did not examine, to keep her a stranger. I began to examine it after that. I learned that she had come to us from a border village burned in the wolf wars of my father's time, that she had been given the kennels because no one else wanted the cold hours and the bite scars, that she had turned a post meant to break a lesser spirit into something like a kingdom of her own, 30 hounds, and a dozen wild-born wolves who trusted her more than they trusted stone walls or iron gates. I learned she rose before the cooks and slept after the watch changed twice. I learned from my steward, delivered as an aside, that she had refused 3 offers of marriage from men in the lower town because, in her words, the wolves need someone who stays. I did not examine why that particular fact struck the bell again, harder. I went that same week to the old chapel keeper, a woman named Sella who tended what remained of Ravensworth's oldest shrine, a low stone room beneath the eastern tower, where the earliest kings had kept their records of the wolf kind long before written law replaced older customs. I told her I wished to understand the gathering habits of wolves in winter, framing it as a matter of husbandry, though she was old enough and wise enough to see through such a framing at a glance. "There is a tale," she said, settling onto a bench worn smooth by centuries of other seekers, older than any king's line in this hall, of a pale wolf that walks between the true world and whatever lies beyond it, and shows itself only at the edge of a bond not yet claimed. The grandmothers say it does not choose for anyone. It only witnesses what 2 hearts have already half chosen for themselves, and waits to see whether either heart has the courage to finish the choosing. She looked at me with an old woman's frank amusement. "Have you seen such a wolf, my king?" "I do not know what I have seen," I admitted, which was, at the time, the truest answer I could give her. "Then you have seen it," she said, "or you would say plainly that you had not." She did not press me further, only pressed a small carved token into my hand before I left, a wolf shaped from pale stone no larger than a thumb, worn smooth from handling by whatever seekers had come to her before me. "For courage," she said, "when the choosing finally asks itself of you." I carried that token in my coat through the rest of that winter, and I have it still, kept now in a small box beside our marriage bed, though I did not understand, the day she gave it to me, how soon I would need it. It was around this time that my council began pressing me, as they did every year the frost set in, toward a matter of state I had long deferred. The question of a queen. Lord Halloway of the Eastern Holds had brought his daughter to Ravensworth that very week, a poised and pleasant woman named Odo, well-spoken, well-dressed, entirely correct in every particular a council could demand of a future queen. I sat beside her at the long table for 3 evenings running, and found her agreeable enough, and found also that I counted the courses until I might reasonably excuse myself and walk down toward the kennel row, where no one expected me to be charming. She would suit the throne well, Wexley observed, watching me watch the door rather than my guest. She would, I agreed, because it was true, and because agreeing cost me nothing. And yet, he said, and did not finish the thought, only looked at me with the particular patience of a man who has watched a boy become a king, and still remembers the boy well enough to see through him. Lord Holloway's daughter left within the fortnight, gracious and untroubled, having read something in my distraction that I had not yet dared to read in myself. I felt no relief at her leaving, and no grief either, only a kind of quiet that told me plainly the matter had never truly been a contest at all. By the long dark, the shortest day, there were 31 wolves at her door each night, and I had stopped pretending to myself that I did not walk past that door every evening on purpose. My counsel noticed before I confessed it even to my own thoughts. Old Wexley, who had served my father and had no patience left for my pride, cornered me in the map room with a bluntness he'd earned through 40 years of service. You go to the kennel row every night, my king, and you come back looking as though you have been struck by something you cannot name. The pack knows what it is. The pack decided before you did. When will you stop making the wolves do your courting for you? I did not answer him. I went instead to the yard that very night and stood in the archway and watched. 31 wolves, Ash at her threshold like a sworn guard, Bram curled nearest her window. A young gray female, new to the pack that autumn, pressed so close against the door that Fenna had to nudge her gently aside each morning just to step out. They did not fight each other for the place, did not snarl or posture as wolves will when den space is contested. They simply arranged themselves, patient and certain, around her, the way iron filings arrange themselves around a thing with pull enough to matter. I asked myself, standing there, what it was they knew that I had spent 3 winters refusing to know. The answer came to me plainly enough once I let it. I had built Ravensworth on the idea that only my voice could command a wolf's trust, because that was the whole of what a king was supposed to be to his pack, the one hand all creatures bowed to. And here was a woman who had never asked for a single wolf's loyalty, who had only ever fed them and warmed them and stayed, and she had won something from them that no throne, no bloodline, no command had ever bought me. It should have wounded my pride. It did not. It felt instead like watching a door open onto a room I had always lived beside and never entered. The bell struck a 3rd time that night, low and long, and did not entirely stop ringing after. I did not go to her that night. I told myself it was because a king does not descend on a servant's door at midnight surrounded by half his pack, that there was dignity to consider, that I did not yet trust my own hands to be steady. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was afraid of what I would feel if I knelt among those wolves, and she looked up at me the way she looked at the wounded pup, unhurried, certain, as if nothing in the world required urgency because she had already decided how she meant to meet it. Instead, I went to her the next morning, in daylight, in the ordinary business of the kennel row, and I made myself speak to her as a king speaks to the keeper of his hounds. Which is to say, I made myself speak to her at all, for the first time in 3 winters, as anything other than a nod passed between strangers who shared a courtyard. The pack has taken a liking to your door, I said, and heard how foolish the words sounded the moment they left me. She did not laugh at me, though I half expected it. She considered the question as if it deserved real weight. They've taken a liking to warmth and to being let alone, my king. I don't drive them off when they come. Most in this castle would. She scratched Bram's gray ear as she said it, and the old wolf who had bitten 2 men leaned his whole weight into her hand like a creature half his age. Bram does not suffer many hands, I said. No, she agreed. He suffered yours once, I'm told, before my time. She looked at me then, truly looked, the first time in 3 winters I could recall her doing so without the deference of a servant measuring how much of herself she was permitted to show a king. Her eyes were a clear, quiet brown, the color of still water over stone, and there was no scorn in them, no complaint at having been overlooked so long, only a kind of patient assessment, as though she were deciding whether I was worth the trouble of being truly seen. "Is there something amiss with the kennels, my king? You've not come to inspect them yourself in all my years here." "No," I said, "nothing is amiss." That too was a lie of omission, and I think she knew it, because something in her mouth curved, not quite a smile, the beginning of one withheld out of courtesy or caution, I could not tell which. I left before I could say anything further foolish. I did not sleep well that night, nor the next. I returned 3 days later with a better excuse prepared, though it deserted me the moment I saw her lifting a fallen beam off the roof of the smaller run, alone, in a wind sharp enough to cut. I took the other end without asking, and together we set it back against the wall, and she thanked me with the brisk courtesy of a woman accustomed to managing without help rather than the flustered gratitude I had, I confess, half expected. "You've calluses," she observed, glancing at my hands as I flexed the ache from them. "I would have thought a king's hands stayed soft for holding scepters and signing decrees." "I was not always a king," I said. "Before my father died, I mucked these same runs beside the old huntmaster to learn what it cost to keep a pack fed and healthy. I have simply forgotten, these last years, to come back down and remember it." "Then come back down more often," she said, and there was no flattery in it, only a plain invitation, offered the way she might offer it to anyone who showed a willingness to lift a beam in the cold. I did not tell her that I intended to take her entirely at her word. "May I ask you something that is none of a king's business?" I said, before I could stop myself. She considered this with the same unhurried weighing she gave every question, as though words were coin not to be spent carelessly. "You may ask. I make no promise of an answer." "Why the kennels?" A woman with your steadiness could have asked for a place in the hall, at the treasury, anywhere warmer and better paid and free of scars. I gestured, without meaning to, at a thin white line along her wrist that I had noticed, and said nothing of for longer than I should admit. "Because nothing in this castle has ever once needed me the way these animals need me," she said, plainly, no self-pity in it at all. "A hall has 100 hands to run it. A frightened, half-wild wolf has one, if he is fortunate, and none at all if he is not. I decided a long while ago that I would rather be the one hand a creature could trust completely than one of 100 hands no one particularly notices." She looked at me then, and there was nothing cutting in it, only honesty. "I do not say that to shame you, my king. I say it because you asked, and I have found that most people, once they ask a true question, deserve a true answer." I had no reply worthy of that, and so I gave none, only nodded, and found that the silence between us afterward was not an uncomfortable one. I came again 2 evenings later than I ought to have, well past the hour when a king's presence in a servant's yard could be explained by any ordinary duty. I found her sitting on the low step outside her door, Bram's head heavy in her lap, staring up at a sky gone hard and bright with stars, and something in the set of her shoulders told me this was not a woman entirely at peace, whatever calm face she wore for the wolves and the castle both. "You look troubled," I said, before I thought better of announcing myself so plainly. She considered denying it. I could see the impulse cross her face, and then, apparently, decided against the trouble of pretending. "There is talk in the lower town that I have bewitched your pack somehow, my king, charms or worse. A woman came to the gate yesterday wanting to know what herbs I burned to draw wild things to my door, as though I had done anything at all but feed them and let them stay." She stroked Bram's fur, slow and steady, though her voice carried an edge I had not heard in her before. "I have spent 3 winters being no one in particular to this castle, and I confess I had made a kind of peace with that. It is a stranger thing to suddenly be someone people whisper about, and I find I do not care for it half so well as I expected." "They should be whispering about the debt this castle owes you," I said, "and not about herbs and charms that do not exist." "Debts are not so interesting to gossip as witchcraft," she said, with a thin ghost of humor that did not quite reach her eyes. "I do not mind for my own sake, my king. I have weathered worse than gossip. I mind because Bram and Ash and the rest of them have done nothing but choose warmth and safety, and I would hate for that choice to be turned into something ugly by people who have never once knelt beside a frightened animal in their lives." "It will not be," I said, with more certainty in my voice than I had any right to claim, since I held no more power over idle gossip than any king ever has. But I meant it as a vow regardless, and I think she heard it as one, because she looked at me a long moment before she spoke again. "You come here often now," she said. It was not quite a question. "I do." "May I ask why, my king, when you asked me nothing at all for 3 winters before this one?" I had no honest answer ready that did not require more courage than I possessed that particular night, and so I gave her the truth in its smallest possible form, the only piece of it I could manage. Because I was slow to notice what was in front of me the whole time, and now that I have noticed, I find I cannot stop. She did not press further, though something eased in her shoulders at the answer, and Bram, as if satisfied that some accounting had been properly settled, sighed heavily and went back to sleep in her lap. Winter deepened, and I found more beams to lift, more fences to mend, more reasons that satisfied my captain and fooled no one else in the castle. I learned the names of her wolves one by one, not from the steward's reports but from her own mouth, said with the same unhurried care she gave to everything. Ash, who had lost his trust in ropes the year huntsmen tried to break him for sport before she came and gentled him back to himself. The young gray female, whom she called Wisp for how quietly she moved. Frost, the pup she had warmed back from the edge of the world, growing sturdier by the week on Scraps and Fenna's patient hands. I began to understand that what the wolves had found in her was not merely warmth, as I had first told myself, but attention, the rarest gift in a castle where every other soul, myself chief among them, had looked past her for 3 long years. Word of the wolves spread through Ravensworth as such things do, quietly and then all at once. The scullery maids whispered that the kennel-keeper had been marked by the old wolf spirits, the ones the grandmothers still spoke of at the hearth tales, the pale shining wolf that was said to walk before every true joining of mates was sealed. My huntsman, less given to old tales, simply said the animals had chosen her the way animals choose the person who will not fail them, and that he had never in 40 years of service seen the like of it, 30 wolves keeping one door like a shrine. Not everyone in my council took the matter so gently. Lord Ferris, the eldest of my advisers and the most jealous of Ravensworth's good name, raised the question plainly at table one evening, thinking perhaps that plain speech was owed a king who seemed to have lost his good sense. "A kennel-keeper drawing half your pack from their proper runs is no small matter, my king. It speaks to disorder, whatever pretty tale the servants tell of it. Perhaps she ought to be moved to other duties, and a steadier hand given the kennels." I found my voice sharper than I intended, sharper than I had used with Ferris in all the years he had served me. "The kennels have never been better kept in my lifetime, nor my father's. If you wish to call devotion disorder, Lord Ferris, I invite you to spend a single frozen night in that yard, and see which of you the wolves choose to lie beside." The table went quiet. Ferris did not raise the matter again, though I saw in his face that he understood something of the truth before I had said it aloud even to myself, that I had just defended her the way a man defends what he has already, somewhere in his own unguarded heart, claimed as his to defend. I went to her that same night to tell her nothing of the council's talk, only to see that she was well, and found her instead teaching young Wisp to take food gently from an open palm, patient beyond anything I could have mustered after such an evening. I did not mention Ferris. I only sat on the low wall near her door, in the cold, and watched, and felt something in me settle simply from being near enough to see her work. I began to dream of a wolf I had never seen waking, not one of the flesh and blood pack in my kennels, but a great pale shape, more light than fur, standing at the edge of my sleep with eyes the color of dusk, watching me the way a patient teacher watches a slow pupil. In the dream it never spoke, never lunged, never demanded anything of me at all. It simply stood at the far end of whatever room my sleeping mind had built that night, patient as stone, until I understood that it was waiting for me to cross the distance myself, and that no amount of waiting on its part would ever substitute for that single act of will. I woke from that dream 3 nights running with my heart pounding as though I had run the length of the castle wall, and each morning I told myself it was only the strange effect of watching 40 wolves keep one door, nothing more, a mind making sense of what the eyes had seen. I did not yet believe my own excuse. I do not think I had believed it in some while. I did not understand the dream until the night it walked into my waking hours entirely. It was the eve of the frost breaking, the night the ice on the north well finally groaned and gave, when I could bear my own cowardice no longer. I left my hall without my guard, without my captain, without the ceremony a king is supposed to carry into every room he enters, and I walked down through the sleeping castle to the kennel row, where 40 wolves now lay gathered around a single door, pale in the moonlight like a snowfall that had chosen to hold its shape. 40, I counted them twice to be certain, and both times the count held. Every wolf in my keeping that had ever refused a stranger's hand, gathered at the threshold of a woman who had never once asked them to come. I stood at the edge of that gathering and did not know how to enter it. A king does not kneel in the snow among wolves not his own to summon. But something in me had stopped caring that night what a king was and was not meant to do, because the bell that had been ringing low in my chest for a season now rose all at once into something closer to a chord, full and resonant, as though a single struck note had finally found the others it was meant to sound beside. Bram lifted his great gray head and looked at me. He did not growl. He rose instead, slow and deliberate, and padded toward me through the gathered pack, and pressed his head against my hand the way he had not done since I was a boy at my grandsire's knee. One by one, as if his movement were a signal, the others shifted to make a path, not fleeing me, not yielding to me as a king, but making room the way a household makes room at table for a guest it has been expecting all along. The door opened before I reached it. Fenna stood in the frame with a shawl drawn over her shoulders and a lamp in her hand, its light catching gold in loose strands of her hair, and she looked at the sight of me standing in a sea of moonlit wolves with an expression I had not seen her wear before, not surprise exactly, but something unguarded, as though a wall she had built out of long practice had quietly, without her permission, come down. "My king," she said softly, "you'll catch your death standing barefoot in the frost." I looked down. I had indeed come without my boots properly laced, without my cloak clasped, like a man who had left his own chambers mid-thought and not noticed the cold until a kennel-keeper pointed it out to him. "I could not stay away any longer," I said, and it was the truest sentence I had spoken since the day Wexley cornered me in the map room. "I have watched my whole pack choose you for a season, Fenna, while I stood at a distance telling myself it was none of my concern. It was the entire whole of my concern. I simply did not have the courage to say so." She did not answer at once. She set the lamp down on the stone ledge beside her door, and knelt instead among the wolves, the way she always knelt among them, and rested her hand against Bram's neck, as if drawing strength from the same current that had drawn him to her all winter. When she looked up at me again, her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears and not quite laughter. "I used to think," she said, "that they gathered here because I was the only one warm enough to matter to them. I told myself that was all it was. A kennel-keeper's small comfort, that the animals preferred her door to an empty run." Her hand did not stop moving over Bram's fur. I did not let myself think it might mean anything more, because what would a king's pack want with the one woman in this castle no one thought to remember at table? They remembered, I said. They remembered before I did. That is the whole of my shame in this, and I will not pretend otherwise to spare myself in front of you. It was then that it happened, the thing I have no name for even now, though I have turned it over every night since trying to find words worthy of it. I stepped past the last of the gathered wolves and knelt before her in the frost, close enough that our breath mingled pale in the cold air, and when my hand found hers where it rested in Bram's fur, warmth moved between us that was not the ordinary warmth of skin meeting skin. It was as though a hearth long banked in both of us caught all at once, not with heat that burned but with heat that settled deep and certain into every bone I owned, and I heard, not with my ears, for the yard was silent, every wolf around us gone still and watchful. I heard the low bell in my chest finally stop ringing its lonely single note and answer at last, a second bell ringing back. Fenna's breath caught, her fingers tightened around mine. I feel it, she whispered. I have felt something moving under my skin all winter and thought it was only the cold. It was never the cold. No, I said. I do not think it was. Around us, as if some tension the whole pack had carried for a season had finally been permitted to loosen, 40 wolves lay back down into the snow with the unhurried ease of creatures whose long watch was finally, quietly, complete. Bram exhaled a great huff of breath and put his chin upon his paws. The young gray female nearest the door gave one soft sound, not quite a howl, more like a note of satisfaction, and went still. I did not kiss her that night. I want that understood, for it matters more to me than any crown I have ever worn, I asked. I asked her, kneeling in that frost with my whole pack for witness, whether she would have me, not as a king claiming what his wolves had already chosen for him, but as a man who had wasted 3 winters in cowardice and wished, if she would permit it, to spend all the winters remaining making amends for them. She was quiet long enough that I feared the answer, and then she laughed, softly, the sound cutting through the cold like the first thawcrack in river ice. You are asking a kennel-keeper for her hand while 40 wolves lie between us as chaperones. I could send them away, I offered, though I had no notion how I would have managed it. Do not you dare, she said, and there was such warmth in it that the bell in my chest rang a third time, gentler now, settling into something that felt less like a struck note and more like a held one. They kept this door a whole winter waiting for you to catch up to them. Let them stay and see the end of what they started. So I stayed too that night, sitting beside her on the frozen step with her hand in mine and her wolves, our wolves. I understood then, for they had always been more truly hers than any leash or law had made them mine, settled around us like a court more honest than any I had ever held in my great hall. We spoke of small things, the kind of things I had never permitted myself the leisure to ask a servant of my own castle. What village she had come from before the wolf wars took it, what she had wanted to be before duty handed her a kennel key instead, what she thought of the pup she had warmed back to life that frozen afternoon, who she had already named Frost for the season of her birth. Near dawn, when the sky had gone the color of a wolf's coat just before full light, she said the thing that I have carried with me every day since, the thing I return to now whenever I doubt that any of this was real, and not some fever dream born of loneliness and moonlight. I never asked them to choose me, she said, watching the gray light climb the courtyard wall. I only ever gave them a door that didn't lock. I think that's all any of us wanted, in the end, yours to give as much as theirs. I have thought on that more than on any counsel my advisors ever gave me. A door that does not lock. It is such a small thing to offer a person, and it had taken me a whole winter and 40 wolves to understand it was the only offering that had ever mattered. We were married before the frost fully broke, in the kennel yard itself, at her quiet insistence, so that Bram and Ash and Frost and Wisp and Cole and all the rest of that pale gathered pack could stand as witnesses to the vow, the way they had stood witness to everything that came before it. Lord Ferrus attended, and said nothing more of disorder, and I noticed he was careful, that day, to keep a respectful distance from Cole, who had grown steady enough by then to lie near the makeshift altar without a single soul flinching from him. Petra stood as my own witness, and wept without shame, an old huntmaster who had waited half a lifetime to see a kennel-keeper's worth finally recognized by the one man in the castle slowest to see it. I did not build her a throne. She would not have wanted one, and I had learned enough that winter not to offer what a person does not ask for. When my steward pressed me, out of long habit, about what grand hall might be prepared for a queen, I told him plainly that Fenna would keep her post among the wolves for as long as she wished it, throne or no throne, and that any lord who thought a queen too grand for muddy boots and torn harness straps was welcome to say so to my face. None did. I gave her instead a new door for her old stone house, wider than the last, so that in winters to come there would be room enough for whatever pack chose to gather there, wolf or otherwise, and I built it myself, with my own 2 hands, sanding the grain smooth through 3 long evenings, because some doors a king should not leave to other men to hang. Fenna watched me work without offering to help, which I understood by then as its own kind of gift. She had spent her whole life being the one who tended others, and she let me, for once, be the one who tended her. That door has never once been locked. Not on the coldest night since, not on the night our first daughter was born within sound of Bram's watchful breathing outside the window, not on any night I have lain beside Fenna and felt that same low bell answer itself quietly in the dark, more a held note now than a struck one, steady as a heartbeat that has finally found its matching rhythm. Bram grew old and gray-muzzled in the years that followed and never once left her side by choice, and when he died, at last, of nothing more dramatic than a long and gentle age, he died with his head in her lap on the very step where he had first waited out a season of frost for a king slow enough to need 40 wolves to teach him what his own heart already knew. 40 wolves became, in time, simply the pack, no longer strangers gathering out of some nameless pool, but a household settled at last into the shape it had always meant to take, joined over the years by pups born in that yard who grew up knowing no other truth than that the kennel-keeper's door was always warm and always open. Our daughter took her first unsteady steps across those same stones, one small hand gripping frosts grown rough for balance, and I have never in my reign as king felt prouder of any single thing I built than that plain wooden door, worn smooth now by years of hands and paws alike. I have learned in all the years since that frozen threshold that the truest thing a king can build is not a wall high enough to keep the world out, but a door plain enough and open enough, that the right heart never has to knock twice to be let in. I think of that most on winter nights, watching Fenna sleep beside me with the low bell settled quiet and sure between us, and I think, too, of Bram, who knew before I did, and forgave me the slowness of catching up.